something strange has happened to our conversations. And I don't mean like overnight. It's more subtle than that. You kind of wake up one day and realize, wait, something shifted. It feels like you're no longer allowed to be wrong, and you're barely allowed to disagree. Because the moment you challenge an idea, the conversation stops being about whether it's true. And suddenly, it's about how it made someone feel. And once that happens, reality kind of loses its seat at the table. Feelings start outranking facts. And that didn't just happen randomly. It didn't come out of nowhere. Now, before anyone jumps in, this isn't an attack on emotion. It's not logic good, feelings bad. And it's definitely not about hating empathy, compassion, or women. That's not what this is. What it is about is imbalance. Specifically, what happens when emotional idealism starts replacing rational testing. When one mode of regulation dominates and there's no counterweight anymore. And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. Like, you can't unsee it. I keep running into the same thing in conversations, especially online, but not only there. If you speak calmly, if you don't mirror emotion, if you challenge an idea instead of validating how it feels, people don't really respond with disagreement. They respond with judgment. They don't say, I think you're wrong. They say, you lack empathy. You're insecure. You're broken. You're going to end up alone. And if you pause for a second, notice what just happened there. The argument wasn't addressed. The person was. Logic didn't lose. Logic was disqualified. And once you see that move, you start recognizing it everywhere. Emotional idealism isn't complicated. It's actually pretty simple once you name it. It's when feelings get treated as truth, when emotional discomfort gets treated as harm, when empathy quietly becomes moral authority. So instead of asking, is this true? The question becomes, how does this make people feel? And if enough people feel bad, the idea itself gets labeled immoral. Not debated, not tested, just shut down. And logic starts to feel threatening in that environment. Not because logic is cruel, but because it doesn't bend. Logic asks things like, what are the consequences? What are the trade-offs? Is this consistent? Does this actually work long term? Those questions don't feel comforting. They feel destabilizing. So logic gets reframed as cold, unkind, even dangerous. Not because it is, but because it refuses to submit to emotion. That's how emotional energy starts dominating rational thinking. Not by defeating logic, but by morally disarming it. One of the biggest shifts I've noticed is this. We moved from saying, you're wrong, to saying, you're a bad person. Disagreement turned into a character flaw. Tone became evidence. Boundaries got reframed as cruelty. That's not debate. That's moral pressure. And the uncomfortable part is, it works. At some point, this stops feeling like a few bad conversations and starts feeling cultural, because you see the same emotional logic showing up in relationships, workplaces, media, institutions, politics, everywhere. And you can actually measure it. In the US, fire tracks cases where students or student groups are targeted over protected expression. In 2025, they recorded 273 attempts, the highest on record. Now that doesn't mean people suddenly became evil. It signals something else. It signals a shift in the rules. If speech creates discomfort, it gets treated like danger. Sometimes it's framed as safety, sometimes as harm, sometimes as inclusion, but the result is the same. Challenge becomes taboo. And this is where the idea of the feminization of the West actually matters, if we define it properly. Because it doesn't mean women are bad. It doesn't mean femininity is weak. And it doesn't mean empathy is wrong. It means the way power gets regulated has shifted. Historically, healthy societies were balanced by two forces. One, focused on rules, standards, accountability, consequence, competition, truth testing. The other focused on care, cohesion, empathy, protection, harmony, inclusion. You need both. But when one dominates without restraint, systems drift. What we're seeing now feels like emotional regulation replacing structural regulation. How something feels matters more than whether it's true. Who is hurt matters more than what works. And challenging ideas gets treated as cruelty. That's not compassion. That's imbalance. You see the effects most clearly in private life. I remember reading a comment about a man watching his uncle get publicly humiliated by his wife at a family gathering. Put-downs disguised as jokes, threats hidden in humour, contempt masked as care. Everyone laughed. The uncle laughed too. What stood out wasn't anger or dominance. It was erosion. That's what unregulated emotional power looks like. Quiet, polite, destructive. And what's striking is that a lot of men don't respond with confrontation. Not because they're weak, but because confrontation itself has been reframed as immoral. Setting boundaries risks being labelled controlling. Disagreement risks being framed as emotional harm. So men withdraw, not weak, outlawed. There's a psychological move underneath a lot of this. It's projection mixed with moral judgment. And it sounds like, I don't relate to how you think, therefore something must be wrong with you. Instead of curiosity, there's diagnosis. Instead of disagreement, condemnation. That's not empathy, that's control. Truth doesn't disappear in emotionally governed systems. It becomes conditional. It's allowed only when it comforts, only when it aligns, only when it doesn't hurt feelings. The moment truth causes discomfort, it gets labelled harmful. That's how soft authoritarianism forms, not through force, through moral pressure. And just to be clear, this isn't a rejection of empathy. Empathy matters a lot. But empathy without correction doesn't lead to kindness. It leads to instability. When feelings can't be questioned, power goes unchecked. Resentment builds, trust erodes, truth becomes optional, and no society survives that for long. If this resonates, it's probably not because you're angry. It's more likely because you're noticing imbalance. You're sensing that emotional certainty has replaced rational testing, and that disagreement has started to feel like a kind of sin. Your intuition isn't telling you to pick a side. It's telling you to watch systems that can't tolerate challenge. Because empathy without truth becomes coercion. And truth without empathy becomes cruelty. We don't need less empathy. We need empathy that can survive reality. And we need truth delivered with enough care that strong people can still hear it.